Nice to see you, everybody. So I'm Mike Halton. I'm the head of business development here at Qlic. And for those of you who don't know who Qlic are, you might have sort of seen the title, but not be aware of us. We help charities and not-for-profits with everything IT. So that's IT support, cybersecurity, as we're doing today, project delivery, cloud migrations, all that sort of stuff. And obviously the FSI are very kindly one of our clients on that as well. So we work very closely and have done for, I think it's probably about 7 years now, actually, maybe even longer. Yeah, very long time. So today we're here to talk about cybersecurity specifically. And what I've tried to do is narrow it down into kind of 3 key sections. And I won't go into them for the moment. Just as a heads up, I've pre-recorded today's webinar. I did it the other day. Well, firstly, just to make sure the content's going to be good for you, but also so that I can sit on the Q&A or in the background and answer any questions as we go along. And if there's any that come up that I think might be quite good to answer live, I'll grab those at the end as well. So don't worry about asking something halfway through the webinar. I will be here to answer it for you. And also just to note, my colleague Laura, I've just seen it pop up in the chat, has popped in a link to book a free consultation with us as well. So if you have specific questions about your organisation and you think it would be really good to just get some advice about us individually, obviously some of the solutions that I'm talking about today are generic in as much as they work for everybody, but not specific necessarily to your needs. By all means, jump into the chat, fill in the form, and obviously we'll book in a free time. And in actual fact, it's a booking form through Microsoft 365. So you can just pick a time in someone's diary, half an hour, and we'll just run through with some questions, anything you've got, and just help you on there. So yeah, that should already be in the chat now. So what I'm going to do, provided technology doesn't let me down now, is share my screen, play the video for you. I'll jump into the Q&A, and then I'll be back at the end just to pick up on any questions that you may have. Bear with me. Let me just get this back up and running for you. Hi everyone, thanks again for joining us this morning. For anyone who's joined a little bit later than my introduction already, I'm Mike Halton from Qlic, and I'm the head of business development here at Qlic. Today I want to talk to you about cybersecurity, and we want to talk you through some of the top tips that we're using at the moment for some other charities and not-for-profits around the UK. Some of them you may be familiar with, others you may not be. So obviously, hopefully we can upskill some of the ones you know already and provide you some more information around the ones that you don't. Some also might be helpful to you as an individual as well as an organisation. So it's worth keeping an eye on some of those, and I'll mention those as we go along just to help you through as we go. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, I've broken it down into 3 key areas. I think I've tried to make this webinar as simple as possible and user-friendly, and obviously not bombard you with too much information. So we want to break it down into 3 key areas, and I think that's important to do to really get a keen idea on the attack points. They call it surface attack area of your organisation, and this is just from the sort of types of threats and type of issues that we've seen over the last few years. It has changed, and it does continue to change, so we will always keep updating these probably annually, if not even more so. But I think it's vitally important to just keep on top of what's going on in the world, particularly around cybersecurity. So we'll start with the first one. Probably the biggest risk to your organization is your users. The technology can assist in certain ways, but ultimately having well-trained staff that are familiar with, particularly users in key areas like finance, management, but people who have access to really sensitive data, both internally and externally around members or around patrons that work with your organization, it is vitally important to be upskilling these people. So I'm going to show you some of the technology we can talk to them about and put in place for those users. But ultimately, I would really recommend looking at even some basic cybersecurity training for those users. There's some really good organizations that offer some awareness courses you can do online. One that we partner with is called IT Governance. And by all means, if you want to pop some questions in the Q&A, then we can answer those for you as well. And we'll send over some links for some references to those, but they're really good. And they're all online learning for staff to just understand a bit more about malware, ransomware, phishing attacks, email scams, nothing too in depth, but just sort of some of the threats that they would really get to notice. So if we kick on with our first tip for protecting your user. Everyone will be familiar with this one already, so this is a really nice and easy one to start with. So it's strong passwords. You'll hopefully be using these already, but if you're not, please do. What we've got here, just above my head, this side, is a couple of good examples of online platforms that can give you some strong passwords, password generators that you can go to websites. So LastPass have one, and we'll come on to LastPass a bit more about what that does later on. And DinoPass as well. DinoPass is a really great site. They will offer strong passwords. You can set the guidelines and parameters that you want them to be. Now, there's been a shift, I suppose, in passwords over the years. It used to be general consensus was to reset your password fairly frequently. So most people here, I would imagine, would be used to resetting every 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, whatever that might be. That has actually changed. So National Cybersecurity Centre, which generally run a lot of the guidelines that the organisations work towards, and certainly what we work towards as well, have actually suggested that in recent times, the surveying and the polls that they've done and research that they've conducted suggests that users resetting their password frequently just results in less strong passwords, so weaker passwords as we go along, because people will choose a very basic password, QWERTY789, and then instead of trying to reset the whole thing, they'll add an exclamation mark on the end. And then next 90 days comes up, they'll add another exclamation mark on the end, and they just become easier and easier to guess. So what they're suggesting now and what the industry is focusing on is strong passwords, and that can be a mixture of uppercase, lowercase, letters, symbols in that password. Ideally, sort of 10 plus characters, I think is normally a pretty good shout. But what we're doing internally when we're generating passwords with our support team, we go to DinoPass and we will generate a simple password and a strong password and push both of those together. That then becomes one of our user passwords. It's pretty big, so we're going to come on to some password manager stuff next. But importantly, what we're doing here is we're reducing the risk of attack, but without needing to constantly ask users to refresh their passwords. There's some frequent ones as well you might have seen. I think Apple does a really good job of this, of sandwiching words together or letters together. So they'll have sort of a 4-letter word hyphen, another 4-letter word hyphen, another 4-letter word. That sort of password's absolutely fine, but please make sure it's not anything like QWERTY789, password 1, Millwall 1, or anything like this. It's vitally important to make sure that it's a password that is not easy to guess. And we're not talking about someone that would sit down and try and type in your password. There would be a list of passwords that hackers have, and they will just keep trying those. But we want to make sure yours is something that's not on that list. So if you have any platforms at the moment, it might be to do with your IT systems. It might be your own personal banking as well. I would recommend going to DinoPass or to LastPass, or there's lots of other password generators. Just get yourself a strong password and reset some of those simple ones that are out there. So if we now move on to something I just mentioned a moment ago, tip number 2 for securing your users. I suppose actually it is securing the users, but it's securing their access to some of your systems. So a lot of organizations that we speak to obviously have lots of different members of staff, perhaps volunteers, perhaps part-time, full-time as well, who need to share passwords to certain accounts. And that might be banking, it could be a CRM system that you use, any kind of online platform that needs a password. Tracking all of those passwords is clearly the hardest thing, and I'm sure everyone struggles with this. Well, hopefully everyone struggles with this as much as I do. So when we're talking about password managers, again, you'll notice we've got LastPass at the top here, and Okta that way is another good example as well. These are both password management tools, so they're online based. We use LastPass personally, but I know Okta do a really good charity solution as well, which is well worth looking at. And a password manager is effectively a secure vault to keep all of your passwords in. And this was one that I mentioned from the start would be a really good one to have as an individual. So all of our team within Qlic have our own LastPass, personal LastPass accounts, which we store our own personal, or many of us do, store our own personal passwords in. And then we have a LastPass for Teams or LastPass for Business, which we store all of our organizational passwords in, and account details and bank account details, all that sort of stuff are within the LastPass as well. And the two can link as well, so I don't have to be logged into one or the other. I can link my personal to the organization's LastPass, and it means that I can view all of my passwords in one place, but the organization can only see the organizational bits, not my own personal stuff. So it makes it really nice and user-friendly. Now, the important thing with having a password manager, especially where you've got lots of members of staff or volunteers, and potentially we're seeing frequent sort of turnaround on staff, people coming and going, we don't want to have to keep resetting passwords, or we don't want to leave passwords the same if a colleague leaves and therefore risk that they know the password, particularly if it's someone that's left on bad terms. So what LastPass does, and I'm sure this is the same for Okta as well, It allows you to share a password, set security groups and permissions for different passwords for different users. So for instance, within our team, we have a marketing area, we've got a finance area, we've got a management area, and there's different account passwords within those areas. And it just means that we can secure who can see certain access certain areas, and obviously defined by team or by member of staff who should be able to see what. But what it also can do, and particularly this is great for if you've got users that are coming and going, it can star out the password. So users can still use it. You can get a LastPass Chrome browser extension. So if I go to, I don't know, eBay for argument's sake, and go to the login page, LastPass will automatically populate or allow me to populate a password into eBay without showing me what that password is. So this is vitally important if you've got frequent turnaround of staff, because it means we're going to be able to we're going to be able to allow staff to leave without needing to reset a password for the platform, whatever they're using. It's been an absolute game changer for us and for lots of organizations. It's very easy to manage. It's not something you need external help with. As I say, you might just have a look at the pricing and whether you need it for certain members of staff, or even if you just, there's some organizations we've spoken to recently that would store passwords in an Excel document on their desktop. That's stored by the chief exec or the office manager or someone like that. Even if you just take that person's current passwords and the access they've got, move them onto LastPass, it's going to be infinitely more secure than the setup that you've got at the moment. And it means that if anything does happen, God forbid, the items that we're talking about here with attacks or threats or hackers getting into your system, it's independently stored away from your own server or your own Office 365 or your own Excel spreadsheets. So massively important. If you do one thing out of this whole thing, please do go and start looking at password managers. They're really excellent software. The third item I'm going to look at for securing your user, protecting your user, is multi-factor authentication. Now, this is absolutely something that I'm sure all of you would have used. You may not have heard it called that before, but it certainly would have been something that you've used. This is something that banks have really picked up on over the last few years as well. And the idea here is when you're logging into your account, it could be your banking, it could be your Office 365 account, it might be your Google account or Dropbox, whatever it might be, or CRM system. You enter your username and your password, and then the system sends you either a text message or a notification via an app to log into your account, just to approve who you are. Apple do the same thing, I think, and I'm sure Android do as well. Now, the important thing we're doing here is we're covering off three things, I suppose, really. So if I take an Office 365 account, for example, the user needs to be active, so they need to have a username that's working. They need a strong password, and again, we talked about strong passwords, so we generate those, and I would recommend you generate those as standard for your account passwords. Even if someone was to manage to guess those things and get into your account, having that third step, or two-step they call it because of the password, but having that second step of authentication and security means that if someone guesses your password, the worst that's going to happen is it's going to text you as an individual or send you a notification on your mobile phone to say someone's here's your code to try and get into your app. Obviously at that point you would realize that it's not you trying to get into the app, and you would call your IT team or you would go in and reset your password yourself and know that your account is secure. But ultimately, it means the user, the hacker, third-party individual hasn't managed to get into your account and actually access any of your information. So multi-factor, and again, I mentioned the password manager as an individual. For your organization, this is probably the most important thing that I'm going to talk about today. It really is absolutely key. Any cloud services you've got, or any services really that you can apply two-factor to, it is vitally important to get this on. Even the password managers like LastPass and Okta have two-factor authentication, because obviously if someone gets your master password for one of those systems, we don't want them being able to get into the rest of your information. So yeah, look at multi-factor. It's vitally important. If you're not sure how to set it up, I'll come back to this again later on, but my colleague Laura would have put some links to our free consultation within the chat here. So if you're not sure if your systems have it or how you would set it up, book in a free consultation with us. We'll talk specifically about your organization and how we can help with that as well. So that's my 3 tips for protecting users. So we've got strong passwords, password manager, multi-factor authentication. The next sort of surface attack area would be the individual's devices, laptops, desktops, that kind of thing. So I'm going to cover off again some sort of 3 key areas really when we're protecting the device, and I like to think of it as kind of the trinity of security, and I'll obviously come to the third one. I'll keep that one a secret for now. So the first step will be antivirus, and I'm sure hopefully everyone here will have some kind of antivirus. My only encouragement with antivirus would be to make sure that it's an enterprise grade antivirus. So ideally not using Microsoft's inbuilt Defender. It's not that it's not good. I mean, it's fine. It's just not as good as it should be. And the paid for services offer much more protection, offer real-time security services, offer real-time scanning, and malware protection. And also a lot of them, if you've got an IT provider like someone like us, a lot of them offer cloud-based management, so we'll be able to see from our portal, from our argument's sake, we use Sophos. So Sophos Central Portal, we can log in and see if there's any threats to your device at that time. Now, something that you may not be familiar with, but I'm going to mention on this, is anti-ransomware. Now, ransomware has been around for a few years now, but was really key probably 4 or 5 years ago, certainly pre-COVID. When CryptoLocker hit everywhere. So there was huge problems with the NHS and Met Police and lots of government organisations, lots of hospitals unfortunately got hit by CryptoLocker, and it was encrypting all of their files. Now, lots of software nowadays, and again I mentioned Sophos, but that's a good example that we use. Sophos will offer anti-ransomware inbuilt with their antivirus software, and what that does is it monitors your system continuously for lots of files changing. And if it spots that lots of files are changing, which is generally the activity of a ransomware to do, it will encrypt all your files and it will pop up and ask you to pay BitLocker or another cryptocurrency. Then the anti-ransomware software stops that change happening and reverts backwards, and even alerts the user to say there's been an issue. So it's really basic addition, but absolutely vital, especially at the moment with the number of threats that we're seeing out there. Thankfully, ransomware and CryptoLocker have been fairly quiet. I've not heard anything recently from our side, but I think perhaps that's because a lot of our organisations use anti-ransomware and use our Sophos provision that we offer. So maybe that's why it's working, and maybe why we're not seeing too much of it. But antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware, absolutely key. So first and foremost, the number one thing really for your organisation for protecting the devices. Tip number 2. I'm going to jump onto, again, protecting the device. We're looking at encryption now. So anyone that's going through, this came up through GDPR, but anyone that's going through Cyber Essentials, it's not a requirement, but it's a really good thing to have, is encryption, particularly for your laptops. So desktops tend to be covered under GDPR by physical security because they tend to be locked behind lock and key in an office or in someone's house. And with GDPR, it's all best efforts. So it's best endeavors and best efforts for securing your devices. And obviously physical security is a great example of that. With laptops, because they're traveling, they may get lost or stolen or left on the bus, or someone takes that out of your car or whatever it could be. We really want to make sure that the information is secure on there. So full disk encryption is specifically what I'm focusing on here. And the idea here is to have a tracking software for it as well. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like. Microsoft have BitLocker inbuilt, so you can set a PIN for your device so you can't log into your device without entering the PIN first. And what that means is someone who knows a little bit about IT could take the hard drive out of your device, plug that into what they call a hard drive caddy. That has a USB cable which plugs into their laptop or their desktop, and if you haven't encrypted your device, they can read everything that's on that desktop or laptop without needing the password. So you've bypassed the Windows password completely. You're already into the contents of the hard drive. What encryption does is it encrypts, full disk encryption, encrypts all of the information on that hard drive. So if they plug that into their device, caddy it up, as I've mentioned already, it's gobbledygook. There's nothing in there at all, so it won't show anything. It won't look like anything. So it's really important to have encryption on your devices. More importantly, though, if you've just got BitLocker at the moment or just got full disk encryption but don't have a way of tracking that, the reason we use Sophos Central device encryption is because not only does it encrypt the device using BitLocker, it provides real-time reporting back. So if a user loses their laptop and obviously comes to us and says, I've lost my laptop, we reset all their passwords and do everything we need to do to secure the user, the device is already in someone else's hands. So there's not a huge amount we can do. There might be, depending on how it's set up, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But when it comes to encryption, what we're talking about here is being able to prove that the device was encrypted. Now, if anyone on the call, you may have put BitLocker on your own device before, you'll know it gives you a really big long key which you can store, but it's not actually proof that you've encrypted your device. It's just good sort of preference for you to know that you've done it. Sophos Central will provide real-time reporting, and there's lots of other different providers that do it, but I'm going to use Sophos because it's what we use. And it means that when a user calls in, I've lost my device or it's been stolen out of my car, we can prove that it's encrypted. So rather than needing to go to the ICO to mention a data breach and obviously report any issues that we've had, we can prove that the device was encrypted, and therefore, even if someone does try and take the hard drive out of that device, we know that it had a PIN number on it so they couldn't get to the Windows login, and we know that the hard drive itself has full disk encryption. So it is massively important for your laptop users to have something like this in place. Generally, smartphones, Apple and Android, are encrypted if you've got a PIN on there, so they encrypt themselves when you put your PIN on there. So again, if you've got organizational devices or if you've got users that use their own devices for your data, please do make sure they've got PIN numbers on them to log into them, or PIN passwords, whichever one it is. And ideally, the strongest they can. So I think Apple allow you to go up to 6 characters rather than 4. It's really worth doing. But yeah, for laptops especially, consider something like device encryption as well. The third item I'm going to come on to here is perhaps, well, certainly more prevalent now than it would have been a few years ago, which is centralized device management. So in the past, we had servers in offices, and all the devices would connect to that server in the office, and the server would do all of the security for the network. So things like domain joining, logging into devices, and securing users as they log in, and making sure that only domain joined devices can log into the server network. Obviously, nowadays we're not really in server networks very much or very often, and they're getting fewer and further between. So what we need to look to do is move to ideally a cloud-based device management tool, and I've got one listed up here, which is Microsoft Intune. Now, Intune especially, and I'm going to focus on that, but a lot of the device management tools are the same. What we're talking about here is setting policies on the device which either prevent the user doing something which could be a risk, or enforce something that which the user could avoid, which could be a risk. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what that would be. The prevention side of things would be if a user loses or removes their their device, or it gets stolen, then something like Intune allows us to remote wipe that device, and we can remote wipe the entire device back to factory default, or we can just remote wipe the organizational data off of it. So again, when we're talking to the ICO, we're going to go to them and go, we've had a device that's been lost. So it might be a laptop that's been lost, but it was encrypted, and we've sent a remote wipe detonation through Intune. That's a big tick for the ICO. So it means if we don't have a data breach, we've managed to secure all of the data, we've changed all the user passwords, and we know the device that's in someone else's hands is already going to be factory reset when it gets back to wherever they're trying to get it to. The other thing that Intune's going to do, and I think this is probably the one that's less common, is keep your devices up to date. Now, this is hugely important for anyone that's going through Cyber Essentials process or needs to go through Cyber Essentials. Keeping your device up to date within 14 days of any critical updates is one of the key requirements now within Cyber Essentials, and you have to prove that you've got a process for doing it, and that could be manual, i.e. you have to check every device every 14 days to make sure they've got it on there, or you can auto set policies through Intune, which will allow you to do that. So again, big tick for Cyber Essentials, big tick for any NHS toolkits that you're looking to do as well, having something like Intune in place, because it just means that you can prove we've got full control over those devices when we need them. The final one on here, which again is not really a security element, but it's just quite a nice thing to have, well, I suppose it could be, is auto deployment of apps. So being able to push out Microsoft Office, push out antivirus software, push out, in our case, we use a remote support software called Screen Connect. Being able to force those items out to the users is really important as well. And it just means it kind of keeps your whole IT real estate running up to date, secure, and on the latest versions of software without needing to contact each user and make changes to their devices. Just a great way of your IT team or you as individuals being able to see what's going on those devices, and again report that they are up to date. Intune does other things, like it allows you to see the specs on devices, so you can kind of use it as a mini asset register. It's not meant to be that, but it can be used as that as well. So it's quite a good way to keep an eye on all the devices you've got out there and their ages and specs and how they're running and all that sort of stuff as well. So those are the 3 elements for protecting devices. I'm going to jump onto the third one now, which is perhaps slightly less prevalent now, but still very important, which is protecting your network. Now, clearly, network can mean a lot now. We're all working remotely, or a lot of us are working remotely, or hybrid working in and out of the office. So what we want to focus on here is what are the key, some of the three key things that we still need to be looking at when we're protecting our network, because a lot of us do still have an office, do still have a space that users go to, or indeed need to think about how it works for home users as well. So the first one we're going to look at here is to protecting your network. It's going to be office firewalls. They haven't gone away. It's still vitally important. So they're probably slightly less common, particularly if you're an organization that doesn't have an office anymore. Clearly, this isn't going to be relevant for you. There are things like cloud service firewalls that you can have as well, which I'll come on to in a moment. Um, what a very brief description. This is probably one of the more technical aspects of what we're talking about here, and probably one that you would need to outsource some help for rather than have something internally, unless you've got internal IT team. Um, what it's going to do is it's about protecting you against the multiple attack points to your network. Now, clearly, we're not just talking about one device anymore. We're talking about various ways of being able to get into your office network. So a firewall is going to allow full network traffic scanning, and it just monitors for suspicious activity within the network. And it's inbound and outbound, and that's vitally important. So we're talking about inbound is clearly anyone that's trying to get into your network. That might be someone that's manually trying to do it, or it might be someone that's just sending out bots that go out there and test out IP addresses, trying to get into your network. Uh, but outbound traffic is slightly unusual and is not something that any of the other tools that we've talked about do. What outbound traffic does is it will monitor the internet traffic that devices are having. So, argument's sake, let's say it's laptops and desktops, and it's going to look for anything that looks unusual. So, if something gets through the antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware software onto your device in your office, and no one knows about it, what they tend to do, the first thing those malicious pieces of software do is try and connect outwards to another server, and then that server tells that software what to do, or what access it needs. So the firewall is going to monitor outbound traffic to see, is anyone going anywhere that I think it shouldn't be, or doing anything that I think it shouldn't be. And then obviously it will flag an alert up to the individual or to us as your IT provider, whoever your IT provider might be. It will flag up an alert to say that there may be a problem, and it can even highlight the actual device, so we can then narrow that down, call the user, jump onto their device, run some of the cleaning software that we've talked about already, and highlight if there are any problems. Sometimes that's genuine, in which case we need to just whitelist it on the firewall to say there's no problems with it. Just let the traffic through in future. But sometimes it's a really great way of seeing some of the more sophisticated tools and hacks which are out there that some of the scammers are using to get through. Now, jumping on to, that's obviously for the office network. If we jump onto the remote users now, VPN for remote users is, again, since COVID, it's been massively prevalent, and it's a great way for bridging the gap and keeping your remote users as secure as your office users. Some of you may be familiar with VPN. It's been around for many, many years and used for lots of different things. In this instance, what we're talking about here is it's a virtual private network. So we're setting up a tunnel from the user's home address or home broadband into your office. So they're effectively acting as part of your same network then. So any traffic that user has, so for any web browsing or any downloads, uploads, that kind of thing, they're going to go out from their broadband, out through their router, through the internet back to your office and be scanned by your firewall or by your network before it goes out to the internet, and then it comes back vice versa the same way. Now, importantly, what we're doing here is we're making sure that I mean, this is a really good example actually for content filtering. So if your organization uses web content filtering to protect against accessing certain types of web pages, when the user goes home, they're taking your device home. And if it's not a device-based web content filtering, then they're able to do whatever they want on that device then, and they're completely unprotected. Having a VPN in place means they're going to connect back into your network, be an extended part of your network, and therefore follow the same rules that happens within your network. Plus, obviously, we're getting the same firewall protection that we would in the office. So we're protecting against, I'm blocking it a little bit, protecting against hackers for remotely accessing those as well. And then therefore it means we don't have to worry about the protection of the user's home router, whatever the passwords might be. We're actually enabling security from the device itself as it goes out through the internet. So, I mean, in fact, I'm saying about home workers, this works for anyone that's connecting in from internet cafes or abroad or anything like that as well. We're bridging that gap to hit between the office network and whatever the remote user's location is. Now, the final one, and then I promise I'm done, that we've got on the list here is cloud-to-cloud backup. I suppose This one's a little bit out of the scope. It's not quite a security measure, but it's more of a reactive tool for security issues that you would have. Now, importantly, the number one thing, and have a quick look at the point, the first point that we've got here, cloud services such as Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace and Dropbox and all the others are not cloud backup services. They are cloud storage. Now, the big difference there is they will do what you tell them to do. They have recycle bins and trash bins and all that sort of stuff for deleting items. But ultimately, if one of your users' devices gets ransomware, for example, and that gets uploaded into the portal, it will copy over everything that's in that portal, and those files will become unrecoverable. Clearly, there's a few different things that could happen here. So that's one of them. We've got ransomware attacks or that kind of thing. We've got accidental or intentional deletion. So as I mentioned, a lot of the services, particularly the two we mentioned there with Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace, they have recycle bins or trash can areas, but they're not unlimited. So if a file gets deleted, for example, so Microsoft 365, it stays there for either 30 days or 60 days. But if that's something that you don't use very often, let's say it's a funding application you do once a year, or something for a project that you may need again in 3 years' time, if something happens to that file or something gets deleted accidentally and it goes into the recycle bin and someone doesn't spot it within that 30 or 60 days, it's gone forever. Microsoft will delete it. That's the same for Google. They have the same sort of parameters around keeping data storage in there as well. So it is vitally important to have a third party backup against that. Clearly, one of the major things here we've got, and the last point on that, on the top three there, which is we're protecting against supplier vulnerabilities. So if something happens to Microsoft or Google, I mean, I'm sure we're all in trouble at that point, but just in case, we've got a copy of your data. So the one I've got above me here called Datto Backupify. Datto are a really great provider. They provide lots of different services. Our Autotask system that does our managed service provider CRM system is from Datto as well. But their Backupify tool is really good. And again, works for Microsoft and for Google, and enables you to do, it's a 3 times daily backup, automated backup of your data out completely outside of Microsoft or outside of Google. Still UK based, but it means that if anything happens to any of those services, we can restore directly from Datto Backupify, completely into from any time, but into there. And we keep 1 year retention as well. So we've got they do 3 a day. They keep, I think it's 2 a week, and then 4 a month, and then 1 a month after, for beyond a month. So we can generally roll back to a snapshot in time if there's a particular file you need, or as we've sometimes seen, there's a really good example actually. A few organizations that we've worked with recently have had users that leave the organization, delete their items or delete their OneDrive or delete their SharePoint they've got downloaded, or in Google Workspace documents that they've got downloaded, thinking that's fine, they're all on the cloud still, and obviously the cloud just syncs those documents back, or rather syncs the changes, so deletes those documents to the recycle bin. And that can be time consuming. Sometimes that can lose some of the metadata. It might lose permissions for those files. It may be that people don't notice as well. And again, if they're deleting something only they had access to, it may take longer than the 30 or 60 days to spot they've made that change. Therefore, we've lost that data completely. So this is another one. We're talking about sort of accidental data deletion. Quite often, that's not just 1 or 2 individual files or folders. It's a user accidentally thinking, "Well, I'm leaving the organization. I'm gonna clean my laptop up for the next person. So I'll just delete all these files. I don't need them anymore, and they're all stored on the cloud anyway." And then all of a sudden, everyone calls in and says, "Our files have disappeared. What's happened?" So cloud to cloud backup, if you're using cloud services, I really can't emphasize enough looking at something like this. On top of just shared data, so we're talking about files and folders, Datto in particular, and I'm sure there are others, offer email backups. So if you've got, I mean, some organizations will back up all of their users' emails to a third-party service like this. Others may say that there are just particular members of staff, so it might be management team, or I mentioned finance, or key members of staff where losing their email could be a problem. Clearly, we're not just talking about someone deleting all of their emails, which again can happen sometimes. It might be an accident or might be intentional. If someone's leaving, again thinks, well, I'll have a bit of a tidy up the things I don't think they need, then there's no recycle bin. We've got deleted items, but there's no recycle bin for email. It will just be deleted off the server if they empty their deleted items. So Datto provides email backup, contacts, calendars are included in that. OneDrive backup as well, for any users that have anything stored in their individual OneDrives, and then SharePoint backup. So if you've got your shared area and all of your shared files and folders within there across the team. It's going to back up all of that for you as well. And you can do that on an individual basis. Obviously, SharePoint's everybody. So that's quite a lot of information I've gone through today, and I'm just slightly over the half-hour mark, so apologies for if I've kept you for too long. So just to very quickly summarise, we've talked about 3 key areas: protect the user, protect the device, protect the network. Starting with protecting your users, we want strong passwords. We want to consider, and again, for strong passwords, just look at LastPass, DynoPass. There's lots of other password generators online, but just make sure that they're a strong password generator. Item 2 on that was a password manager. Again, we're talking about LastPass. Okta do a really good charity version. LastPass, I don't think do a charity version, but they do a Teams offering, which allows you to have multiple logins and all share the same information, which is really good. And then the third item for protecting your user is multi-factor authentication. What I would say for multi-factor authentication, you've got a lot of them will set up to SMS, so they'll text the user when they get a code through. So a lot of the services now are actually saying that's not as secure as it should be and retiring, and Microsoft 365 is a really good example of that. So if you can, I really would encourage users to use the Microsoft Authenticator app as an example for Microsoft. And what that does, rather than needing a code, it will send a push notification through and it just says approve or deny, do you approve or deny this login. Obviously, if someone gets that through and they haven't tried to log into anywhere, they can either jump in and reset their password or contact their IT provider and they can reset the password for them. Number 2, protect the device. So anti-malware, ransomware, antivirus, a lot of those come packaged all in one now. I mentioned Sophos Central that we provide. All of that comes packaged all in one. Absolutely critical. Encryption for your laptops. So make sure your laptops have encryption in place so that if we need to report a breach to the ICO, we can say to them, there should be no issues. We've got encryption in place, which means that someone can't just caddy that laptop hard drive up, plug it into another device. And then the final one there is about centralized device management. So just to reiterate on that one, we're talking generally about cloud-based device management. If you've got a server in the office and it's domain joined, your devices all speak to that server and they're generally pretty well managed. Specifically, we're looking at device management for remote users or remote devices or any environment where you don't have a server, where you don't have anything managing those devices. And that's just going to allow us to enforce updates, enforce strong passwords rather than just encouraging users to do strong passwords. And even for things like Cyber Essentials, where it asks you to turn off auto run for USB keys and all that sort of stuff, you can do all that through Intune. Plus, you can push applications, things like antivirus and support and Microsoft Office and our Screen Connect software, all that stuff can be pushed out through device management as well. And then finally, protecting your organization's network with a firewall. We talked about that already. VPN for remote users. Again, I mean, if VPN is something you're considering, I really would recommend booking one of our free consultations. We'll have a chat about whether we think it's necessary, because it may be that the systems that you've got in place are all protected enough, but it's just another great thing to know about for protecting users, particularly if you've got any remote or needing a remote access to what we call line of business applications. That could be CRM systems or access databases in the office, whatever that might be. Have a chat with us about those. And then the final one on protecting the network, or more of a recovery situation, probably affecting all of the above, is the cloud-to-cloud backup service. Hopefully, if you have a server, you'll have a backup for that in place already. But if not, then really do look at, there's some great cloud backup services for your servers or for your NAS drives and things like that you're storing your data on, or particularly if you've got anything on local user devices. But cloud-to-cloud backup is vitally important, and it's the one that people tend to overlook pretty frequently. So hopefully everything's been informative for you. My colleague Laura's popped the link to our IT consultation in there. So if you want to jump on and book in with one of those, it might be with myself or it might be one of my colleagues, but we're all very good, hopefully. So just feel free to jump on. We can answer any individual questions that you've got then. And if you've got any other questions, please pop them in the Q&A and I'll answer them now for you. Thank you very much. There we go, and I'm back with you. For the entire time, I think we lost the Q&A, didn't we? So we've got the chat just in case if anyone did have any questions. If you have no questions, hopefully that means the content was good and answered everything you needed. But if you do have anything else, and as I mentioned already, something with cybersecurity, it's very organization specific. So if there's anything I've mentioned, you're not sure if it's relevant for you, you're not sure how to set it up, whatever it might be, hopefully you can see the links now for us to be able to do the consultations for you. Feel free to book them in. They're completely free. They generally take about half an hour, and we'll just give you some good advice and support on the side of things as well.
Amazing, thank you. From us as well, I was certainly jotting down some good points there about to bring back to everyone, and also really interesting to know, especially from small charity perspective, about the cloud and everything not being that backup, as I know a lot of charities and people have that assumption that it is. So it's really good to be able to get that clarity on that side of things. So
yeah, to be honest, I think it's intentional. I think a lot of the services like Microsoft and Google almost hide the fact that they are just a cloud server because they want you to think of it as your one-stop shop for IT. But I mean, I know because of how many recoveries we've had to do, it definitely isn't just that. But yeah, so it's well worth looking at. But I'm glad you enjoyed it as well.
Definitely. I'm not sure if we've got any questions in the chat. Oh, yes, we've got one from Rebecca here saying, do you have any good resources / links that would help staff training at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So depends on specifically what. So there's a third-party organisation that we recommend called IT Governance that does, I think, offer charity discounting as well. And I can send the link out. In fact, if I grab the link for you quickly, or Laura can grab the link for us and pop it in there. IT Governance do lots of different training, but specifically for cybersecurity, they do some staff awareness e-security training, which you can do as a user in your own time. So you can sign up one person or all people, however many you want to do. You buy the licenses. It's just an online platform that they do, and they follow through, and then they get a certificate at the end. They actually do a really good GDPR one as well, if anyone needs any GDPR training. That's particularly good on there because it talks about obviously data protection, and it's a nice tick in the box to say that our staff have had appropriate training as well. So that's a really good resource to have.
Really good, because I know a load of charities as well. It's sort of one person who might be in charge of all that IT stuff, and getting other people involved and interested and up to knowing what's what. It's also really can be a little bit of a challenge, or can be just a challenge finding the time. So yeah, knowing
that's
that
it, and it changes all the time as well. Yeah, you know, I mean, even we do our small charity IT days every year, and even the things I'm talking about now wouldn't necessarily be the same last year, or the sort of threats that we see wouldn't be the same as last year. So having, perhaps not every year, but certainly every couple of years, a refresh on cybersecurity is really worth doing. And I've just spotted that Laura's popped in there about the e-learning courses as well. So as if by magic, they've appeared.
Brilliant. I'm just having a look and seeing if there are any other questions from anyone. Just to reiterate, the recording will be sent out to you. Might take a couple of days to just top and tail, so that you don't have my lovely chat about the weather several times over for you. Brilliant. And we'll also send in that email all the links in here, as well as Mike mentioned, we've got the Small Charity IT Day coming up. So if you've got any other questions on topics you'd like to be able to see, then we'll be sending around a sort of survey link as well for you to fill out if there's anything specific that appeals to you. So that will be in there as well. If we don't have any more questions, I'm sure people probably need a little bit of a break away from the screen. But I personally would like to say a massive thank you from the FSI and our charities to you both for coming and delivering a really interesting and helpful webinar. So a massive thank you from us.
No, thank you for having us, and apologies for talking about cybersecurity first thing in the morning. But I mean, hopefully, if there's a good a time as any, hopefully Tuesday's a good time to do it. It's not the start of the week. That's the main thing.
Definitely, and it's always useful to hear. So thank you.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. And yeah, just going